Book of Amos is one of my favorite Old Testament books, really, because the prophet Amos in the 760s BC was not really a priest. He really wasn't a prophet by trade or vocation. He was a shepherd. And God called Amos out of this vocation that he knew and placed a burden on his heart to speak the word. In fact, the name Amos means burden bearer. And in this book, we see the burden, the urgency, the pain and the hurt in Amos's heart for the people of God. And we see the urgency to declare the word of God to them. So, what does he actually declare? Now, this is a message to Israel before they would fall to Assyria. And as Amos is delivering this word, he begins by indicting all of the nations around Israel. This is fascinating to me. Listen to this. In chapter 1, he says, "For 3 transgressions of Damascus or of Syria, and for 4," and he lists their sins. And so picture for just a moment, if you're Israel, you're listening to this prophet talk about the sins of Syria, and you're thinking, yeah, get them, Amos. And then he goes, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, or of Philistia. And then he goes through the list of Syria, Philistia, Phoenicia, Edom, Ammon, Moab. He even gets to Judah, Israel's sister nation, her sister in being created by God, this split nation. And he says, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4. And all of a sudden, Israel, after hearing all of this, could quote and say, get them, Amos. And then Amos says, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4. And then he lists out the sins of Israel. Now, while he has attacked every other nation with their sins, notice what he says about Israel. He says, Israel, you have rejected God in chapter 2. You have been selfish and self-indulgent in chapter 6. You have mistreated the poor in chapter 5. And he says, you are greedy, and then you have religious acts without true worship. You are full of idolatry and this adulterous spirit. And so at the end of Amos, Israel stands condemned and stands guilty of everything that they had done. But listen to the very last part. It says in verse 14, God says, I will restore the captivity of my people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. He says, I will plant them again in their land, and they will not be rooted out from their land. God promises, if you will turn to me, all the guilt and shame that you had, I will take from you, and I will plant you back and restore your fortunes. There's a beautiful picture of the gospel for us, that we stand in the midst of a guilty people, a guilty world. And while we can point our finger at everybody else, they had to have the finger pointed at them and say, no, you are guilty. But by the cross of Jesus Christ, there is no longer any condemnation or shame. God takes our sin and gives us grace. Oh, that we could see the gospel in the book of Amos.